Hey, it's Sean Spicer. I am the author of the about-to-be-released book, The Briefing, Politics, the Press, and the President. I'm glad you could join us tonight for a little live signing. I'm going to sign some books, talk about the briefing. I decided to write this book about 3 months after I left the White House. I realized that there was an opportunity to tell the story of who I am and how I got to Washington, D.C. and ended up at the White House, as well as some of the big stories behind the campaign, the convention, the transition, and
your time in the White House.
Time in the White House. With me is Kay Foley, who has the pleasure of working with me on a daily basis.
Hi everyone, I'm Kay. I'm Sean's Chief of Staff, and I'm going to be moderating some of the questions that some of our pre-orders have asked already. So, without further ado, we can start with the important ones.
Yep.
From Heather in Albany, New York. She wants to know, pineapple or no pineapple on your pizza?
I wouldn't. That's Heather, way to start it off. I would not order it, but I would eat it.
Okay.
I'm a fan.
So you're not pro pineapple. But
I am.
not...
No, that's not true. Stop attacking me. I am pro pineapple. I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't order it, but if someone had it on there, I wouldn't take it off either. I think it would probably taste pretty good.
Okay. So a little bit more serious, taking us down memory lane, I suppose, like your book does. What is one of your favorite memories from the press briefings?
I think there's I kind of put them in two categories, if you will. I kind of serious and not serious. There were some really heady issues that I felt kind of honored to be part of history and be in the moment to get to announce certain things. When we were announcing Neil Gorsuch as the next Supreme Court Justice, the idea of being part of that process and announcing what was happening behind the scenes, and that to me was a big one. Growing up in Rhode Island as a Patriots fan, having Rob Gronkowski kind of walk into the briefing room one day, ask if I needed any help, would definitely be on that personal list of highlights.
Okay. Chris out of Hales Corners, Wisconsin, wants to know how your military time prepared you for your role. And I think this is a good one because I don't think a lot of people know that you still do serve in the military.
I've got 19 years in the United States Navy. I think the way it prepared me in a lot of ways was sort of, I'm a big believer in after-action reports. I look at what I've done and try to figure out what a lot of times after an exercise you get 3 up, 3 down, meaning you talk about what are the big things that you did really well, and then you also talk about the areas that you need to improve. And that's kind of how I've dealt with a lot of big professional issues as well, is that we do a press briefing or a rollout or a launch of some sort, look back and say, hey, what went really well and what needed to be improved. And then I think secondly is sort of this, I'm a big fan of chain of command, and I believe that roles and responsibilities are important, making sure that people are held accountable and everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing and who they report to.
Good one. I'm going to throw you the most common question you get a lot, just to kind of get us into it. Why did you write the book?
I wrote the book primarily because when I left the White House, I was doing a lot of public speaking and attending events, and people were asking me the same question over and over again. But it wasn't just the questions. They were, how did you get to the White House? What was it like to be there? But most important, they would say, I read a story in X publication that you felt this way, or that this was your motivation for why you did a certain thing, and I kind of felt like if I wanted to correct the record, then I needed to do it in my own voice and say this is exactly who I am, how I got there, and why I did what I did. Good and bad, the good, the bad, the ugly, the not so ugly. And so I, had a discussion, and I put it all down and I think do a really good job of walking through all of that. Plus, the people who've read the book already, it's amazing the reaction that I've got where they'll say, I didn't realize that this was happening during the campaign, or I was unaware of this. And I think part of the thing that's interesting about the book is that I'm the first person that sort of put this down that was part of the campaign, part of the transition, and in the White House, and can kind of look at the total arc that occurred.
And not just that, I think also your involvement with the Republican Party before that.
Yeah, right. And I think knowing what we did and what we were seeing, and there's even this little there's pictures in the book, which is nice. But there's also a really cool picture in here that shows our data from what we were seeing in Michigan, and how, for everyone who says, oh, we had no idea that we were going to pull off this win in Michigan, here's what the voter scores that we were doing at the RNC in conjunction with the Trump campaign showed. And I think it gives people a behind-the-scenes look at the data operation that we had running and what we saw, so that people all the time say, what would the polls say? And I said, I don't really care what the polls said. I know that we had invested $175 million in data and ground, meaning we were putting people on the ground, they were extrapolating data, we were feeding that back in. There's this big loop. So we constantly knew what voters were thinking at all times. We knew who to target, where to target them, and how to target them. And we lay that all out in the book so that people have a better understanding of what really happened and why we were doing what we were doing.
Nice. Well, and Bert's question out of Mariana, Florida, is similar to this. He wants to know, how confident were you all that Trump could win with all the negativity that was out there, including most of the major news outlets? Those are Bert's words.
I know. Thanks, Bert. I know. It's a good question, because I will tell you, I've been involved in campaigns for a long time. And whether you're running for student council or for president or involved in the campaign, rather, you never get that invested in something and think you're going to lose. Right. So I think we knew we had a path to victory, that we could win. But then, to Bert's question, how much, did I think that we were going to sweep every state and get 306 electoral votes? No. I thought, clearly I thought we had a path to get into the 270s. Right. But when election night came, to see all of these states fold, and it is interesting because there are times in a campaign where the data says you're going to lose, but somehow you still believe that you're going to win because
anybody who's worked on a campaign knows that.
Right. Yeah. And on the flip side, the data was telling us that we had a really good shot at all of these states, and yet, for a lot of reasons, we kind of were like, okay, well, if we can, you're only focused on getting 270, and so the rest of it was sort of gravy, and I think, again, I would there's a whole chapter on this where I lay out what we're doing and why we're doing it.
There is a whole chapter on it. It's a good chapter.
You have to say that, but it is good.
Let's talk about the people who came before you in that role, and then, Sarah, who's come after you. Did you get coaching or advice from any White House press secretaries, or did you just adapt your previous roles into this one?
I spoke to most of them on a bipartisan basis, and I think that's what's really cool about the role. There's been, I think it's 30 press secretaries that have ever held that title, and it's a really tight-knit group, bipartisan basis. And when I took over the White House, Josh Earnest, like many press secretaries have done for their successors, left a note for me, and he had really kind words, which was that despite our political differences, he was cheering for me to succeed because he cared about the country and the country succeeding. And I think we all feel that way as people that have held that job, that we want our successors to succeed. We want the country to do well, and we know how tough that job is in particular. So, Dana Perino and Ari Fleischer in particular were hugely helpful to me, not just before I took the job, but also while I was in office. I would lean on them and say, hey, I'm going through this. Is this normal? How would you, what is your advice on this particular issue? And they were always super, super generous with their time and their counsel.
Do you remember any specific pieces of advice?
There's a few anecdotes in the book, but, everything from Mike McCurry, who had served under Clinton, had told me, make sure you pick a day and keep it to yourself. So whether it's Saturday or Sunday, but spend a day, at home with your family, and you're never disconnected between the phones and everything else. But I think he was right. It's important that you had one day that you weren't running in the office. And at the beginning, that was really tough, and I was pretty much going 7 days a week. But towards April, I was trying to heed that advice.
And what about watching Sarah Sanders, take over that role? How do you think she's done with it?
I think she's done fantastic. Part of the job, if you think about it, I was oftentimes, and I think it's chapter 9, lay all this out, that I often became the story. For right or wrong, numerous times, it was, I became the story. And Sarah's rarely had that happen. I think partially she really understands how to, what the president wants, how to check in with him to make sure that she's saying what he wants, how he wants policies and announcements articulated in a way that are in his voice.
Do you empathize with her, or do you still watch the briefings?
I catch it if I'm around. I mean, I've been on the road a lot, so I don't...
Doing what?
A lot of speaking, a lot of book promotion. So I don't watch it religiously. If it's on and I happen, sometimes I'll stop and watch for a second or two. But let Sarah do her job.
Okay. What was the transition like between communications director and press secretary, and how are the jobs similar and different? I think that's a good one. I think a lot of people don't necessarily know what the titles mean.
Yeah, so the press secretary lives in the moment. It's the day-to-day job, answering the questions that the media have, and dealing with, whether it's a personnel announcement, a policy decision, you name it. Their job is to make sure that the press's office's job, and the press secretary as the leader of that office, is to make sure that the media is getting the announcements and the information they need. The communications director is sort of the big picture strategist, talking about what are the talking points that we have to have, what's our surrogate operation look like, how are we getting, who's on television, what are the collateral things that we need to roll out a thing, making sure they're working with, whether it's the Office of Legislative Affairs or other agencies or departments, to craft a message and to execute it. So they're not so much always living in the moment. They're supposed to be thinking ahead, thinking about the strategy of what's happening.
Do you prefer one over the other?
I talk about this in the book. I think I was much more suited probably for the communications role. That's sort of been my wheelhouse for a while, is kind of creating long-term effective strategies and then executing them, so it's not just a series of tactics, but it's a real well thought out plan of where do you want to go, and then how can you get there. And that's kind of been what I've, and at the beginning, obviously, I played both roles, and that, I think, I walked through was a very big challenge, is we didn't have a communications director at the beginning. I was playing that role, and then we had someone come in and, hold that job for a few months, and then they were gone again, and it was a challenge to kind of do both. They were both big jobs, and, so I wanted to make sure that I think having someone dedicated to both of those roles is crucial.
Yes, I would agree. I think people underestimate the fact that you've had two jobs while you were there. Talking about your time in the White House, what's something that would surprise people about working there? Just working at the White House in general, not necessarily in this administration.
I think that in terms of what would surprise people, it is small. The West Wing in particular is very small and very calm. And there's this, if you read a lot of the stories, it makes it sound very, a lot bigger and probably a lot more chaotic. It's just not, the space and the structure doesn't lend itself to people running up and down the halls. There are no really halls that you could run up. They're very small.
Like Aaron Sorkin's version?
Right. It's smaller, it's compact, and there's not a lot of people in the West Wing. That most of them work across the hall, or across the street rather, a small little alley, West Executive Avenue, and old executive office building. And so you don't get that sense of chaos and hecticness that you might if you pick up some of the if you read some of the stories that are out there right now.
Got it. What did you normally eat for lunch while working in the White House?
So there's no real cafeteria per se. It's, the White House, the West Wing is very small. There's what they call the Navy mess, which is sort of a takeout window, staffed by sailors from the United States Navy who oversee food service and food safety for the President of the United States. And they have, a menu that you can get salads and burgers and such like that. So, I mean, almost probably 90% of the time, I just had this mixed green salad with salmon on top, and that's all I ate. And then, like, if I felt like I had a good week, I would throw in some chicken tenders. But I lived dangerously, but I had to earn that.
Never a pizza.
Never a pizza.
Do you think that that's being the press secretary is the most stressful job you've ever had? Do you think there's been a
hands
period of
down.
stress? Okay.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say in all of government. And I think it could...
Is it also that?
There were days when I think, and there are moments when that job probably competes, but there are some heavy jobs in government with real decisions that are immediately impacting people's lives in a very profound way. And I would never put my experience up with theirs. But as far as my personal experience goes, there's no question that was, and I talk about, it's not just the day-to-day job, it's the impact that it has on, your family and your psyche, and it's very intense, very demanding, and the hours are crazy. You're up early, and there's no off button. There's no, like, it's
Can't
the
stop the
weekend,
news.
it's Friday night. It's not just the news, it's actions. I mean, there could be, somebody injured or something, an explosion or what have you. There's no telling when that happens or where it happens, and you've got to be prepared at all times to brief the media and address it.
True. You can't. There's no off button on that.
No, I mean, and I go through a lot of these moments and try to just take readers behind what it's like to be there and to realize how many things that you might not realize on the face of it that you're facing.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the fame that has come with your unique role as press secretary.
Yeah.
Since leaving, we'll go back into how you got there, but since leaving, someone wants to know if you've had to keep a low profile since you're so recognizable, or are you able to live a normal life?
A normal life. I think I can do most things. Yeah. I haven't really not done something. So if we look at it the opposite, there's nothing that I've said I can't do this because, you're a little bit more conscious of what you do and where you do it. And in a lot of cases what you wear, just because you know that you might attract a little bit more scrutiny.
Fair. Strong sense of style, though. Okay, well, getting into why you kind of went from a smaller, no name recognition position, like in the press secretary, usually you get a couple weeks of people that are tuning in all the time, they're paying attention all the time, and partially because of a lot of the turmoil at the beginning of the administration, but also because of the SNL side of things, you took off. So people are always asking you, have you met Melissa McCarthy?
Well, I'm trying to remember. Obviously, I always get stuck down. Remember what chapter, but I talk about the SNL piece in the book and what it was like and where I was and all that. It's an interesting answer because I have not, since I left the White House or while I was there. I have been told that we were at a Time 100 party in New York City. The former chairman of the RNC, Reince Priebus, was being honored as part of Time's event. I was traveling with him, and I believe she was either one of the other honorees or she was there. I can't remember which. There is someone that was there that said, "Don't you remember you guys shook hands?" So, I say that because I know. Well, no, but I know that there's somebody that's going to say, that they did see it, and therefore we have met. And so that's why I kind of put a little asterisk there that we have not had any kind of substantive discussion.
Got it. Do you find the SNL skits, were they hurtful to you? Some kind people out there asking.
I know. I don't know that I would say that they were. The first one was, I think, almost entirely funny. But then I think they got a little mean-spirited and were a little over the top. And I think they went from being funny to mean, and that's where they lost it.
What's your biggest regret from your time working in the White House?
Well,
I think you go into some stories in the book where you'd like some do-overs.
Right,
but
and there are a bunch of stories in the book where I do say that I would love to get a do-over. I think that there's no question. That first press conference where I talked about the inauguration, I do think that set the tone, and the die was cast on that afternoon in terms of, no matter what I did or said, after that date, there was just that was going to be kind of part of how everything got, the lens by which everything got viewed from. I think I go into this in great detail, but I think that is probably the one day that if I could have a do-over. There were some other significant days or mistakes that I made or things that I'd want to do over, but I think in terms of an overall narrative, that one particular day and incident really set the tone for so many things that would come after that. So that would be sort of my
regret, if you were to. Okay. This is a fun one. Does it feel weird continuing to have a career after achieving the highest media office in the land?
Well,
as someone invested in working with you in the future, I'd like your answer on this.
Well, I mean, I have a family and I need to make money and for myself and them, and so of course you've got to do something. I don't think there's many people, save those who win the lottery, that suddenly drop out of doing anything.
And do you think it's the highest media office in the land?
Well, certainly as spokespeople go, sure. I don't think that, in terms of forward-facing, that there's no question that's I guess the highest. But I think there's a lot of other things within the industry itself that you could potentially do.
Okay. Let's talk about your time growing up in Rhode Island. And your connection to the sports teams. Back to thinking about the fact that the Pats got to come through, and Gronk took over came in on your briefing at one point. Some of your fans think that maybe you have an in now, and they want to know how the Pats are going to be this year.
I don't have an in. I think aside from having some great photos and continue to be a big fan of the Patriots and Coach Belichick and Tom Brady and Robin Gronkowski and the whole team up there, the Kraft family. But I think that I really think that this has got to be the year. I think Brady and Belichick are sticking it out because they really want at least one more Super Bowl in them. Gronk's staying around. That's a good thing. So you've got a good chunk of a really, really great team still in place, and that's helpful. And one of the things that has happened over the years with Belichick is that he's always had this ability to cultivate new talent that was sort of unforeseen in other places, and
create a team.
Right, and there's a good mentality and a good spirit there that I think really looks good heading into the season.
Great. Heard it here first. But in terms of growing up in Rhode Island in general, what was it like to grow up in the smallest state?
That's it. It's a small state. I think that you don't recognize the difference of what another state is, but obviously I traveled to some other cities. We didn't spend a ton of time traveling as a kid, so I don't know that I had that great of awareness as to what other places were like. And within New England, obviously there's a lot of other small states, so you're surrounded by, to some degree or another. They're rather similar. Massachusetts is obviously much bigger. Mm-hmm. Connecticut's bigger, but there's not a ton of cities in the sense that are that close to Rhode Island. We didn't go to Hartford much. So point being is that I think that's the environment that you grow up in, and where both sides of my family, my mom's side, my dad's side, had kind of grown up there, and so we knew a lot of people. It's very family oriented. A lot of folks in Rhode Island tend to stay for generations. And so it's a very close-knit community, and it's a state where people are, like I said, in many cases have been there for generations, so that there's a sense of, if you know a family, you've known them for a while and they've been around for a while.
People take care of each other. Okay, back to your days in the White House. Walk us through your morning routine when you worked there.
I would generally leave my house about 5:30, 5:40, try to be at the White House just before 6, and then there's this small sort of executive type gym, which is basically like a hotel gym in the old executive office building, which is literally across a street from the West Wing, and I would go in there, try to work out for 40 minutes or so, and just kind of multitask on 2 phones. And
that's it.
Read the news, know what was going on. There was a TV in the gym, so I'd flip around cable stations. You're really trying to get a flavor for what the day's going to be like then. So that was sort of my way of getting some sort of cardiovascular exercise, and you're trying to get a feel for the day. What issues are they talking about on morning cable? What popped overnight? And then by about 7 a.m., I would have showered and gotten over just after 7. And the team would start to gather. The senior folks of the team would gather and come in and start to, give us their assessment of what was happening, where we thought we were going to face some incoming. And so we would sit there and digest that till just about 8 o'clock. And then we'd have a senior staff meeting where we'd gather. And I'd kind of report out, here's where we think a lot of the issues are going to be coming up, and also be kind of taking in what the other staffers were saying, that realizing, okay, you guys are announcing this, or we're going to be doing that, and that's going to cause, give us either an opportunity to make some news, or make sure that we're ready to respond to it. But you were gathering that, then we would meet again as a team early in the, right after that. Then what I would do is generally try to do a couple meetings and start getting ready for the briefing by about 10:30. And so sometimes that meant bringing in, the subject matter experts or the key person from, whether it was, the Office of Legislative Affairs, the National Security Council, the Domestic Policy Council, the National Economic Council. You wanted the people who, if you knew that we were making a big announcement on X, you wanted the key staffers to come in to be briefing you on what was going to be happening, why that was important, what we really wanted to get out there. And that's on both offense and defense. So there are days when we wanted to talk about something, we wanted to make sure we knew exactly what the deal was, or we were going to be taking incoming and we wanted to know that. Then I would check in with the president a few times if he hadn't called already about, here's what's going on in the press, and get his feedback on things. And then in some cases we had to kind of go round and round, because there were days that the lawyers or the policy staffers would want to say, hey, look, we want to weigh in on this for whatever reason. A little bit more prep, and then would head out to do the briefing.
And it's like what time at this point?
You're about 1:30, 2 o'clock.
Done the whole day.
And then after the briefing's done, so the briefing generally lasted a half hour to 40 minutes. After that's done, you would get, my staff would sit down and do a little bit of feedback. How did it go? What else do we have to clean up? And then do we, have meetings, try to get ahead of the next day, figure out, return reporter calls, attend, coordination meetings. Maybe there was another, event that we were trying to plan that they wanted me to sit in on and weigh what we were going to do. But, and then by about 6 o'clock, it was time for dinner, which is very similar to what I got for lunch. I'd sit there, we'd have a wrap meeting around 6 or 7 o'clock where we'd sit, all of the different people on the team would come in, on the press and the communications staff, and talk to them about, here's what was going on, here's what we needed to get ahead of, here's what we thought we were going to face tomorrow, so that we could start to get ahead of the next day. What prep materials do we need? Where were those big responses? How was the story playing? And then we kind of give everyone their marching orders, and then, by about 8:39, it was time to head out.
So of all the things you just listed during the day that happen as a press secretary, what do you think is something that people would be the most surprised to find out kind of falls into that job category, that people don't really think about as being part of the role?
I don't know what people think about the role, but I think it's amazing to me how much goes on beyond the briefing. You see this briefing for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, And yet there's interactions. The press secretary's office is sort of equidistant from where the James Brady office is, where the press work and gather every day, in the Oval Office. And they can gather outside the press secretary's office. That's where they're allowed to go. There's a group of folks that work in what they call lower press, which is a couple of the deputy press secretaries, the assistant press secretaries, all who have sort of a portfolio of issues that they cover, so that by the time it gets to the press secretary, it's either questions that are sort of above them, or issues that are well beyond whatever. But each of the areas are broken up into various portfolios that the assistant press secretaries have, and then ultimately the deputies have, and they try to handle as much of that as possible. But a lot of times things are going on at a very high level, and that's when the press queues up outside the White House. Outside the press secretary's office. And so all day long you're interacting with the press corps, either trying to find out what's on their mind or questions that they have, or giving them answers, or trying to push a narrative or a story that you have on something that's happening, so that
good thing you're a people person.
Yeah. So but there's no quiet part during that day. But that briefing is just is a very, small piece of a much, much longer and busy day.
So, you're pretty social media savvy, I will say. You're on Twitter, Instagram, the gram, as you like to call it. Do you think social media has had a positive or a negative effect on politics?
I think it's a mixed record. I think it has allowed more people to engage, which is a good thing. That people are now, it gives a lot of voice to people who want to support a candidate or a cause or an idea, and so it doesn't matter how much money you have or where you're located. If you have a good idea and a good message, and you can get people to follow you and echo that, that's good. I think where it's had a real negative impact is twofold. One is, I think people will probably say a lot of things on Twitter that they wouldn't say otherwise. One. Number two is there is a lack of standards on there, where people can just say anything without sort of thinking, if you're a journalist, does this rise to the same standard that you would publish a story on? And so the dialogue and the civility have been, I think, are areas where Twitter has not been helpful for society.
Good answer. Are you ready to play a game?
Sure.
All right. We are going to rapid fire 22 questions in 2 minutes or thereabouts.
Okay.
Okay? First question. Where were you born?
Hempstead, New York.
Second question. Who would you want to play you in a movie?
All right. I've gotten this question several times before, and here's my answer on this. I think if I say an actor, then they have to come out and publicly kind of say rebuke or something. So I'm going to refuse to answer that, only to limit the
backlash.
Yeah, the backlash, because the actor will then have to come out and say that they don't want to ever play me. They will never play me. So I'll wait till the deal is signed.
Okay. What was your first job?
So my first job, when I was a kid, I sold everything, and it's in the book. I was the serial entrepreneur. I sold greeting cards, I sharpened skis, whatever I could do to make money. But my first job that I got a paycheck at, I worked for a boatyard in Rhode Island, and I cleaned boats. I sanded the bottoms, sanded teak, polished, whatever needed to get done for, I think, like $3 an hour.
Big money maker.
Yeah.
What is your biggest fear?
I'm not a fan of heights.
Who makes you laugh the most?
Answer
wisely.
Probably my kids.
Yeah. That is a good answer.
Thanks.
What is the one thing you need to have in your fridge at all times?
I don't know.
I think I know.
Well, I don't. So I'm going to pass on that one.
Seltzer water.
Yeah, I don't know that I need to have it though.
Okay. Okay. What is your favorite adult beverage?
It changes with the season, but I have been known to have a vodka soda with a lime.
Just one lime.
Well, I usually have 3. I didn't know we were getting that specific.
I mean, favorite's a favorite. Who is the most interesting person you met recently? I promise that's on the card.
Most interesting person I met recently. Oh. Goodness. I'm sure there's been an event where I've seen somebody that I off the top of my head I can't answer that.
Okay.
So if you want to be interesting and meet
it can be you. That's the grand prize. What is your middle name?
Michael.
I'll do that. What is your biggest pet peeve?
There's a couple that are
No,
tied.
you don't say.
Yeah, there's a couple. I think people who drive in the left lane are up there.
Yeah.
that don't know how to drive according to traffic flows and cause traffic. People who play loud, who talk on their phone without a headset. I mean, so it's on speaker and you're walking down either playing music or talking with everything is on. That's up there.
Yeah. What is the last book you read?
The last book I read is Perfectly Yourself by, I think his name is Michael Kelly. It was a book that one pastor at St. Mary's gave all the parishioners during Lent. That sort of was a really good look at who we are as individuals and how to be a better person.
Mm-hmm. I think you've also read this one a few times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that counts as much, but you should read the briefing. It's available for pre-order now.
One more day to say that. What is your favorite hobby?
I do enjoy reading, especially political books and thrillers in the fiction realm. So that's up there. And then I don't know if it's a hobby, but I really enjoy, obviously, spending time with my kids and my wife.
Mm-hmm. That can be a hobby. We'll allow it. What is your guilty pleasure?
I have a few. It depends. I do love a good trail mix.
Okay.
I mean, is that we're in food or is?
Okay. I mean, I think it's in general, but we can go with food if you want.
Yeah.
A good trail mix, huh? That's what's doing it for you.
You know what? I'm gonna keep it PG.
Okay. Do you have any hidden talents?
I'm sure. I don't know off the top of my head what would qualify as a hidden talent.
I have one that you have.
Well, this isn't your Q&A.
You know all the ins and outs of traveling.
I don't. I will say this. I acquire great tips from people and then utilize them. So whether
you share them.
I do, but they're not my tips as much as I've other people will share a good travel tip, and then I catalog it away and utilize it. So I think I've become a much better traveler. And you're right. I try to share it with those who travel with me so that they can also be better travelers.
Exactly. That counts, I think. What color is your toothbrush?
Clear.
Okay.
Well, I have a white one. It depends. If travel one is clear, one at home is white with with brushes.
So basic.
I didn't realize that toothbrushes were the new thing.
What's your worst habit?
Worst habit. I haven't really thought about it. I'm not sure.
You're so perfect.
Huh?
You're so perfect.
No, I'm not. I just don't. I haven't really spent a ton of time thinking about what my worst habit is. We'll have to work on that.
Okay. I'll come up with some.
Yeah.
How do you take your coffee? Depends on the day.
It never does. I'm a big fan of like stevia, and skim milk. Although I do love a good half and half, but trying to be conscious of the calories.
Right. Slim Jim. What is the last movie you saw in theaters?
It's either Black Panther or The Last Star Wars, and I just can't remember which came out when. But I took my son to see both of those.
Cool. What is the last gift you gave?
I got my wife a purse.
What cause is near and dear to your heart? I think you have a couple.
There's three that I've tried to be as helpful to support. There's a few organizations in the veterans world. I sit on the board of both the Yellow Ribbon Fund and the Independence Fund, both of which provide resources to injured service members. That's one bucket. Second is my wife and I are big supporters of National Council for Adoption. And then third would be pancreatic cancer research. So those are the three that kind of fill those.
Yeah. What is number one on your bucket list?
In all honesty, I think the last year and a half, I've checked off so many things that I didn't even know were on my bucket list. From meeting the Patriots to getting an audience with the Holy Father, working in the White House, flying in Air Force. I mean, there's just a lot of things that I had an unbelievable privilege and honor of doing and seeing and getting and experiencing that, I almost feel like it's selfish to say that I still have a bucket list. So I feel very good about what I've been able to accomplish, or not just accomplish, rather, but experience. And I'm really happy with where I am at this point. And I walk, since we're talking books here, this is part of the reason I wanted people to understand the journey that I took to get me to the White House and why so much of this is really special.
Good answer. Where do you want to go that you've never been? Maybe we can see if they'll sell books there.
Right. There's a couple areas of Italy that I think would be really neat to go to, where Tuscany, Sicily, those would be great. Just because I've seen pictures and so that would be up there on the list. I'm sure there's some really cool islands that would also be nice and relaxing to go to.
Indeed. Could read a good book.
Right.
Okay, let's get back into the administration a little bit before we wrap up. Besides Trump and yourself, President Trump and yourself, what current or past member of the administration could write the best book?
What current member?
Or past. But
this administration.
Yes.
I think that there are a lot of them. The thing that's so interesting is that whether it's Ryan Priebus or Steve Bannon, Jim Mattis from the Defense Department, each of them has some unbelievably unique things that were in their realm specifically. So I think each one of them, would make an excellent author. Yeah.
Join the author game. What do you think? How do you think history books are going to treat President Trump?
I think on a lot of fronts, on the judicial front, he has really done huge. He has made huge strides in appointing conservative justice. So I think once Kavanaugh gets confirmed, which he will, he'll have 2 Supreme Court justices. He has done a tremendous amount of appellate and circuit court judges. And in many cases, they are very young jurists, which means that these are folks that will be on the bench, their lifetime appointments will be on the bench, for, in many cases, 30, 40, potentially 50 years. That's a big deal. And I think that may be one of the greatest legacies that he has. Additionally, you've got the regulatory state, what he has done to lessen that. There's a lot of areas. I think the economy continues to show unbelievable promise, and that could be a massive part of his legacy. But I think the judiciary is clearly where I see the biggest gains haven't been made.
Okay.
Thank you.
How big is the White House communications team?
There's about 45 people total.
Wow.
I think it's 12 or 13 in the press office, and then about 30 in the communications office. And even though that sounds like a lot, if you think about, the fact that how much goes through and comes out of the White House in terms of information, it's actually a very small staff. I mean, the staff hasn't changed that much in terms of total numbers in decades. And I think with the advent of social media and video, there's so many additional platforms and ways in which to communicate that, hopefully it continues to grow.
All right, we have a few more questions. Let's see. How do you, this became, fake news has become kind of a byline of everything in the past 2 years, and people define it differently. How would you personally define fake news?
I've been, I think, fairly consistent with the idea that it's never good to paint any institution or industry with like a broad brush. So whether it's news or government or a brand, or a party, to say that everybody fits into one stereotype is not good. Is not probably the most effective way to look at them. And so I think that where journalists or stories fall short, that they should be called out for it. But I've never tried to be a big subscriber to the overall brand of calling stuff fake news, because I think it undermines the effectiveness of calling out those times in which there is a problem.
So 2 more questions. First one, you worked at the RNC and communications before going into the White House, so you had significant relationships with a lot of these members of the press already. Mm-hmm. Are there some of those relationships that are permanently damaged now based on the volatile nature of the job?
That's a great question, because there's no question that there's a lot of them that have been damaged. I don't know how many of them are permanent. There are a lot of signs that there are some that got better, frankly, afterwards through a lot of conversation and discussion, but there's some that I don't know are repairable. I always think there's a possibility, and I would hope in some cases they are, but time will tell. But I think that there's some that may be irreparable.
All right, last question. When people look back on the name Sean Michael Spicer, as we now know, what do you want them to remember?
I think I would like people to remember somebody who tried really hard to do the best job that they could, is fallible, makes mistakes, but tries to be a better person because of those mistakes. And I mean, I guess if that's the greatest takeaway, then I would be happy. And part of the reason I wrote the book is to give people some context and understanding on the events and circumstances surrounding some of the big decisions that I made and this administration made.
All right. Well, that pretty much wraps us up. You can still order your signed copies on premiercollectibles.com/Spicer.
They look like this.
That's what they look like. And now you know it's actually being signed live here in New York.
No fake news.
No fake news here.
It's all real.
Would you like to say goodbye, Sean?
Thank you for joining us and spending a portion of your Sunday evening. Please go out and buy a copy of the briefing, premiercollectibles.com/Spicer, and we'll get your signed copy off right away. Thank you.
Thank you.